Hey everyone. So I want to talk about an issue that I raised in a recent video about. I mentioned Joseph's tomb and the Temple Mount in a different discussion about how Israel sends the message to our enemies that we're actually serious about this land, about our historic connection to this land. And I want to drill down on that around a headline that might have gone under the radar. Jewish prayer books reportedly allowed onto Temple Mount for first time. How about that? Jewish prayer books actually permitted on the Temple Mount. Look at this. This is from August 16th, a couple days ago. Jewish worshipers were reportedly allowed to use prayer books at the Temple Mount on Sunday, marking the latest in a series of blows to a status quo arrangement that bans non-Muslim prayer at the Flashpoint Jerusalem Holy Site. What? That's correct. Non-Muslim prayer is being banned. Prayer by Jews, Christians, others is banned on the Temple Mount according to the status quo. While in the past, although there is prayer, you'll find out. While in the past, police would eject or detain Jewish visitors caught praying on the Temple Mount, the policy has largely fallen to the wayside over the past 3 years under National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who has repeatedly demanded that police allow Jews to pray there. On Sunday, Arnon Segal, a right-wing journalist and activist who seeks to expand Jewish religious freedom at the site, posted a picture of men praying on the Temple Mount while reading from Sidurim, books of Jewish liturgy. In the photo posted Sunday, towels are seen on the ground in front of the men, indicating the inclusion of prostration on the ground in ritual worship on the esplanade, which was the home of the two ancient Jewish temples. Quote, still no explicit permit, but a first try to make sure the Middle East doesn't lose its mind over this, Segal wrote, calling the event historic. According to Haaretz, citing Segal and an unnamed activist, police allowed the visitors to ascend the site with the prayer books. Here you go. Holding prayer books on the Temple Mount. The Israel police told Haaretz that the site is managed, quote, in accordance with the instructions of the political leadership. Standard practices at the site are based on an operational assessment. The Temple Mount, known to Muslims as Haram al-Sharif, is the holiest site for Jews and the site of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest shrine in Islam. It has been a frequent flashpoint for violence in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Under a fragile agreement between Israel and Jordan established after the 1967 Six-Day War, only Muslims are permitted to worship on the Temple Mount itself, while Jews pray at the Western Wall, revered as a remnant of the Second Temple. Israel maintains overall security at the site, but the Muslim Waqf administers religious activities there. But that has drastically shifted since Ben-Gvir took office. Ben-Gvir has openly led prayers at the Temple Mount, while the Israel police first allowed printed prayer sheets in January. Jewish and Christian groups have gone to the site to sing and pray, with some even fully prostrating themselves on the ground without police intervention, despite the formal ban on Jewish prayer. In response to Ben-Gvir's changes, which have provoked outrage in the Muslim world, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has frequently insisted that Israel's policy of maintaining the status quo in the Temple Mount has not changed and will not change. Now, how much outrage has it actually brought from the Arab world? How much talk do we hear of this in the media? Not as much as they make you think. Now, to give you really my take on this whole issue, I want to go back, and here I'm going to be quoting myself. I'm going to go back to a column that I wrote for the Jerusalem Post in September 2024, almost 2 years ago. Okay, and it was about the war that we're in the middle of. The war with Gaza. And the title of the piece was "Israel Must Deny Hamas Its Objectives to Truly Win the War and Change Mindsets." And here's what I argue in the piece: that in order to achieve unequivocal victory, in order to change the mindset of your enemy, we have to look back to World War II, to what was done with the Imperial Japanese and with Nazi Germany, where they actually suffered a defeat, and that's what changes people's mindsets. It's the only way to do it. But here's what I argue for the purpose of this video. I'm just going to read you a choice passage. If we define the goals of the war solely through the lens of our own security needs, Meaning that's our goal, right? Our goal is to deal with our security needs. And as long as we've deterred them enough, or we've pushed them back, or we've destroyed them enough, we're happy. If we define the goals of the war solely through the lens of our own security needs, while disregarding the way Hamas and its followers articulate their objectives, we run the risk that, quote, if you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat, end quote, which is a quote from the legendary Chinese general and strategist and philosopher Sun Tzu. For our victory to succeed in changing the mindset of our enemies, we must listen to them. We must know how they define the objectives of this war, and we must make sure that these are denied them, whether they are critical to our own war aims or not. In other words, if there's some objective that our enemy has that we look at it and say, we don't care much about that, we should still focus on it because it matters to them. Like, this is similar to what I said about the Americans should demand active, real provable proof of life, real verifiable proof of life of Moshtaba Khamenei. Because you might think, well, what do we care if he's alive or not? But because it will destabilize the regime if the demand is made and they can't do it, it'll destabilize them. It matters to them, and that's why you have to think that way. Okay, let's get back to our topic. Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, Hamas's name for the October 7th attacks. Okay, that's Hamas's name for these attacks. I don't know why I lost my highlight there. Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, Hamas's name for the October 7th attacks, initially appears an odd choice. Al-Aqsa, the Muslim name for the Temple Mount, seems disconnected from Gaza. Notably, the Temple Mount remains under Jordanian Waqf control. Let's see if the highlights come back. Yeah, there, they came back. Effectively, a Muslim sovereign enclave within Israel. Yet for Hamas and its supporters, the war with Israel is a war for the Temple Mount. Think about that. Hamas gave a name to their attacks on October 7th, to this war. They named it the Al-Aqsa Flood. Al-Aqsa is the name of the Temple Mount. They named the attacks on October 7th in Kfar Aza and Be'eri, and all of these, and Sderot, and all of these towns in southern Israel along the Gaza border, those attacks, they named it after the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. For Hamas and its supporters, the war with Israel is a war for the Temple Mount. In their own words, the October 7th attacks were a response to, quote, the Israeli Judaization plans for the blessed Al-Aqsa Mosque, its temporal and spatial division attempts, and the intensification of the Israeli settlers' incursion into the Holy Mosque. That is Hamas's official statement about what this war is about. So here I write, with this in mind, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir's recent call to build a synagogue on the Temple Mount in response to October 7th is worth taking seriously. The ensuing uproar, and you might say, well, I don't really care that much. I'm not willing to have a big flare-up about having a synagogue in the Temple Mount. We must have other priorities. My point in this piece is that thinking means that we're not thinking about what our enemies are thinking. And we have, in order to actually achieve victory, a victory that changes mindsets of the enemy, you have to get into the enemy's head. If they're calling this a war for the Temple Mount, and we want to declare victory, then the victory has to happen on the Temple Mount. So Ben-Gvir, back then, called for the establishment of a synagogue on the Temple Mount. The ensuing uproar to this pronouncement was predictable. U.S. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller, that's from the Biden administration, denounced Ben-Gvir, stating, quote, the United States reaffirms our commitment to the preservation of the historic status quo at Jerusalem's holy sites. The status quo means that Jews and Christians are permitted from praying there. Yeah, the United States is committed to that. Anyway, and will continue to oppose unilateral steps that are counterproductive to achieving peace and stability and undermine Israel's security, end quote. Miller added that building a synagogue on the Temple Mount would demonstrate blatant disregard for the historic status quo with respect to the holy sites in Jerusalem. Historic status quo on the historic site of the temples, the Jewish temples in Jerusalem. But the historic status quo, because history starts in 1967, the historic status quo is that Jews and Christians are forbidden from praying there. We have to preserve that. Miller's words are reminiscent of warnings about U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. So I compare this to the move of the embassy to Jerusalem. We were told that such a move would undermine regional stability and endanger Israel. Remember that? For years and years, we were told that, oh, you can't move the embassy to Jerusalem. There will be a war. The Arab world will be in flames. There will be, it'll cause a diplomatic crisis. What happened? The opposite was true. The embassy move was followed by the Abraham Accords, bringing peace between Israel and several Muslim nations. Apparently, asserting Jewish sovereignty over Jerusalem leads to peace, not instability. The status quo of which Miller speaks gives control of the site to the Jordanian Waqf and restricts Jewish prayer at the site of the Jewish temple. Supporters of this situation are in favor of restricting the basic human rights of Jews and Christians, I should say, I didn't put it in here, to worship at a Jewish holy site in the name of appeasing the enemies of Israel. And it is exactly this status quo that ought to be changed in response to October 7th, not because of Israel's primary objectives in this war, but because of Hamas's. Israel must send a clear message to Hamas supporters in Gaza and elsewhere that their genocidal attack on the people of Israel was an abject failure, a synagogue on the Temple Mount, or even a change in the status quo, enabling organized public worship by Jews there, would demonstrate to Hamas and its allies that they have been defeated. That was what I wrote a couple years ago. And yeah, it's exactly what I'm talking about here. Now, I want to bring into this conversation, it's not just about the Temple Mount, it's about our approach to all of our ancient biblical holy sites, which is, listen, if we have a legitimate claim to this land, it's because we have a historic ancient connection to this land. This is our land. We were exiled from here. There's an unbroken chain of Jewish tradition in our exile, and we never gave up our claim to the land. There have always been Jews in Israel, etc., etc. So when there are sites, physical places that are part of our national history going back thousands of years to the origin of that claim, we should start acting like there actually are historic sites. So here you have a story, and this is from an Arab news outlet, from alquds.com. And I specifically went to an Arab news site for it. And this is from just a few weeks ago, on August 4th. Just over 2 weeks ago. Occupation forces storm Nablus to secure settlers' entry to Joseph's tomb. Local and field sources reported on Monday evening that large forces of the Israeli occupation army carried out a wide-scale raid on the city of Nablus in the northern occupied West Bank. The occupation forces deployed dozens of military jeeps, troop carriers, and armored vehicles that roamed the city's streets amidst a state of heightened security alert in various axes leading to the eastern area. Sources explain that this military movement primarily aims to secure protection for settlers who intend to storm Joseph's tomb. In the Balata al-Balad area, the occupation forces imposed a tight security cordon around the tomb and its adjacent area, and deployed snipers on the roofs of high-rise buildings to ensure unhindered entry and exit routes for settlers. Now, what was this about? This was about a group of Jews who were given security protection to pray at Joseph's tomb. You see, the biblical account states that Joseph was buried in the city of Shechem, which is known in Arabic as Nablus, that he was buried in the city of Shechem, and that he was buried in a very specific spot. It says it at the end of the book of Joshua. It says exactly where he was buried. And he was buried between Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval. We know exactly where those are. In fact, the altar that was built on Mount Eval is still there. We can see it. Joshua's altar. It's an important archaeological site, which is not even open to the public. We should turn it into a major attraction. It's the site where Joshua built an altar upon entering the land of Israel. And it's been basically verified that that's what it is. It's also right there, right next to this. But we know where Joseph was buried. And throughout history, during the long history of the Jewish exile, there were Jews in the land of Israel living in Shechem praying at Joseph's tomb. In the time, we have letters from Jewish travelers going back to the Middle Ages where they describe going to Joseph's tomb, and there's a Jewish community there. And this was an incident from a few weeks ago, and here is Another one, a similar one from May, from a few months ago. And this is also from an anti-Israel site. Israel's Smotrich leads settler raid into Joseph's tomb in the occupied West Bank. Hundreds of Israeli settlers, led by Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, stormed Joseph's tomb in the occupied West Bank city of Nablus on Wednesday. Under heavy military guard, Smotrich and the settlers entered the site in the early hours. You know why? Because they went there to do morning prayers, which are traditionally done in the early hours, after Israeli troops raided parts of the city and sealed checkpoints to secure the visit. Yeah, they sealed checkpoints because they didn't want the people to be killed. So they gave security cover to a group of Israelis, of Jews, to go in and conduct morning prayers at the sacred site of Joseph's tomb. The far-right minister vowed to make the Israeli presence at the site permanent, despite it being located in the heart of a Palestinian city administered by the Palestinian Authority. Our presence here at Joseph's tomb in broad daylight is a clear statement. The people of Israel are returning home to all parts of their land, Smotrich said during the visit, which included morning prayers. Joseph's tomb is living testimony to the inseparable connection between the people of Israel and their land, he added, pledging to transfer control of the complex to the Israeli government. This prayer is another step in a historic correction, and in strengthening our hold on Samaria, Smotrich said, using the Israeli term for the northern West Bank. We are acting and will continue to act so that the Jewish presence here becomes permanent, said Smotrich, who was also the minister in the minister in the defense ministry responsible for the civil administration in the West Bank. Later, Smotrich called on Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Katz to deepen Israeli control over the site. This is the most fitting Zionist response to our enemies, deepening our roots in the land. He's so right, in our land. According to Israel's Arutz Sheva, around 5,000 Israelis entered the tomb complex overnight. God bless them. Joseph's tomb in Nablus, which Palestinians believe is the burial site of Sheikh Yusuf Dweikat, a local cleric from nearby Balata, has long been a target for settler incursions. Look, this has been a sacred Jewish site uninterrupted until Jews were banished from there when it was conquered by Arabs. For centuries and centuries, Jewish community there. We know exactly where Joseph's tomb is. Wednesday's early morning prayers followed a decision by Defense Minister Israel Katz in December authorizing Jewish worshipers to pray at the site during early hours. In January, Knesset member Tzvi Sukkot and other settlers also held prayers at the tomb, describing the visit as historic. So we had one in January, we had one in May. And then Yossi Dagan, the head of the Samaria Regional Council, said, the goal is clear, the full and permanent return of the Od Yosef Chai Yeshiva. There was a yeshiva, a Jewish seminary that was at Joseph's tomb for many years that was removed from there in the early 2000s. So he says that that's the goal, is to put the yeshiva back there. And I love the fact that all these wonderful quotes were in this article on Middle East Eye, which is a pretty anti-Israel site, but they really gave us a lot of articles. So you see that there is activism that is working towards restoring Jewish presence, Jewish sovereignty, Jewish freedom of worship at these important sites. And God bless them for doing this. Now, last thing I want to share with you is, I mentioned a few times that Christians are also being persecuted against by not being allowed their basic rights of prayer on the Temple Mount. And I think that the Christian world, any of you who are watching who are Christian or you have Christian friends, share this video with them, because there's an action item here. Jews can sign this too, but let me show you something. It should be an outrage, especially American Christians, because you're in the United States of America and the American government has a lot of power, obviously. This is an action item you can take. You should ask your senator, ask your congressman, how we can tolerate that Christians are forbidden from praying on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. How can that be? So there is a Christian organization, a wonderful Christian organization called Cry for Zion. And I encourage you to go to their website, cryforzion.com. And they are devoted to teaching Christians about the Temple Mount. There's a book coming out. I've seen a draft of this book. It is mind-blowingly amazing, called Jesus and the Temple Mount. It's an amazing book. I'm not Christian, just to be clear. I have a lot of Christian friends. I do a lot of Jewish-Christian relations work. But they put out this book for Christians to explain to Christians the significance of the Temple Mount in early Christianity. And on their website, there is a link. So if you, at the top of the website, it says take action. And if you click that, you will be brought to a page of a petition that you can sign. So you can sign their petition, but also I encourage you to write letters, make a call, send an email to your congressman, your senator. But check out this petition. It's beautiful. The Temple Mount is the holiest place on earth for the Jewish people. It was here that King Solomon built the first temple 3,000 years ago. Here the Jewish temples stood for centuries before the Al-Aqsa Mosque became the third holiest site for Muslims after Mecca and Medina. At present on the Mount, non-Muslims are discriminated against and are not even allowed to move their lips in silent prayer. That's the official status quo. Contrary to numerous Supreme Court rulings, they are routinely harassed and abused, forbidden from bringing a Bible or prayer book, and even their access is severely restricted. At the Western Wall, which is under Jewish sovereignty, people from all over the world are welcome to respectfully pray. There's no restriction on prayer at the Western Wall. Anyone from, Jew, Christian, whatever, you can come pray there. The state of Israel has an obligation to uphold Jewish sovereignty and international human rights on the Temple Mount, which include freedom of worship, according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18. More than 1,000 experts from 30 countries around the world have acknowledged that East Jerusalem is not an occupied territory under international law, and the state of Israel has officially declared its sovereignty over all of Jerusalem. Jewish sovereignty over the Temple Mount is in the best interest of the human, civil, and religious rights of all people groups in Israel, including the Arab minorities. We are the voice from the international community that supports the Jewish people's rights to sovereignty over Mount Zion, the Temple Mount, meaning the original Mount Zion. We appeal to the ruling bodies of Israel to exercise their full legal sovereignty, guaranteeing Jewish rights on their most holy place. And he ends with a verse, for on my holy mountain, on the lofty mountain, Mount of Israel, declares the Lord God, there all the house of Israel, all of them shall serve me in the land. And let me add the verse from Isaiah, that the house of prayer, which is the temple that sits on the Temple Mount, in the future is to be a house of prayer for all nations. So certainly all nations should be welcome to pray on the Temple Mount freely. And going back to my other point, if we want to win the war, if we want to show our enemies and the world that we are serious about our historic connection, our biblical connection, our ethnic, national connection to this land, we should start acting like it. And we need to exercise full sovereignty over the sacred sites, the historic sites that are central to our claim to the land of Israel. We need to do more biblical archaeology in Judea and Samaria, which is also being suppressed because of politics. We need to show that we are serious about our connection to the land. Go to Cry for Zion. Again, the website is cryforzion.com. Amazing organization, wonderful people there. And I encourage you to sign their petition. And and let's keep fighting. It's wonderful that there's all these activists who are pushing to change this disgusting status quo on the Temple Mount, but also, from a political perspective, like I said, it's what Israel needs to do. And all of those fears, like, oh my gosh, it's going to inflame the Muslim world. Listen, the Muslim world doesn't even lift a finger when they're attacked. Okay, they're a bunch of paper tigers. Look at the embassy move. Think back all those decades where we were told that moving the embassy to Jerusalem is going to cause this massive diplomatic crisis and conflict. Nothing happened. It was the greatest dog that didn't bark story in the history of politics. We need to express sovereignty over the Temple Mount, build a synagogue up there, just change this disgusting status quo and send a message to our enemies that the Al-Aqsa flood was a failure. God bless.